Thank you, Professor Loreto. We have 10 minutes for discussion. Yeah. We have, so if someone want to ask for all these three relations papers, you are open to make discussion or questions or suggestions. Please.
Very nice presentations, and I think we are all aware of the problem, right? It seems that the solutions is taking too long, and my question is more to Loreto, that you said that we have to produce food, we have to feed people. It's a big demand, and I'm from Brazil, and I know Brazil is a good player in producing food for the world. And I see that to be able to fulfill the necessities, we have to use more and more non-natural ingredients in agriculture. And this is causing a problem, another problem, which is we are trying to save humans, but we are killing the earth. Because we're using antibiotics, we're using pesticides, we're using everything. So what you think would be a balance? We cannot go back and do personal type agriculture, which is somehow sustainable. But we cannot do that because we have to produce food for the whole 7 billion people. So what you think is the solution? So how you think this can be done?
Yeah, this is a very intriguing question, and of course very difficult to respond, to answer about that. But we shouldn't, it is true that there is a sort of trade-off between the conservation of natural resources and agriculture, intensive agriculture, intensification at least of agriculture. That's why people talk now about the sustainable intensification of agriculture. We should try to do that in a sustainable way. And most of the practices that I have shown in one of the slides, the one referring to water use efficiency, are sustainable. I mean, you don't use pesticide actually, and you do different things. The other important thing that we should consider is that we have not explored so far marginal lands because we didn't have any option to do that. So there are lands that have not been reclaimed so far by agriculture, and there are lands that can be now reclaimed by agriculture, but have been used for different reasons in the past. For instance, urban area that can be used for agriculture, and we have very good example now of how agriculture in the cities is.
Yes, of course, please.
No, thanks for the question. Maybe I should add to that. I think if you try to feed not the world, but to feed in particular the developed world, the way we do it right now, it's a very wasteful way, it's a very unconsiderate way, and if you would look at smarter ways of combining various effects, say in agroforestry, for example, or reforesting degraded land, when you can actually feed about 10 billion people. We have a paper now under review also where we show that within planetary boundaries, all the planetary boundaries, including climate change, you can feed a maximum of 10 billion people probably, yeah? But you have to use land. For example, you can combine the creation of wind power, turbines with forestry, and you can include also patches of agriculture there. So if you do that, but if you do it only driven by creating the biggest profit for the people who own the land, when of course you will not come up with that solution. So in the end, I think it's a moral issue really, and we are here at the Pontifical Academy. It is, whom is agriculture serving actually? Is it serving the many or is it serving the few?
But Hans,
Sachs.
oh, sorry.
Professor Sachs, you want to ask?
No, I just want to reply that the cost is something important. We know that the availability of food is going down. If you go to the supermarket, they have the organic, they produce it in a way, but it's 3 times the price of a regular food coming from one. So who is going to pay? If we're going to feed the world, who is going to pay the bill?
First we should start to throw away 50% of the food. That's what we are doing.
We have a number of constraints that need to be met simultaneously to end the carbon emissions, to ensure the food supply, to protect biodiversity. So these challenges cannot be achieved on a piecemeal basis, and they can't be achieved by grabbing a solution here and there without thinking holistically. And when one thinks holistically about these issues, I think there are a couple of points that I believe I'll put on the table as assertions that others may disagree with, but I will defend them. One is that there is very little scope for biofuel in this solution, because already the land is so stressed for food, for ecosystems, for other species, that any large land devoted to biofuels is almost surely a threat to other objectives. This is not generally agreed, but that's because we have different communities. We have a climate community which says biofuel is good for carbon, but then the biodiversity community says, keep your biofuels away, we're trying to protect species. And so when you look holistically, it's a little more complicated. Land that cannot be used for food or for ecosystem services should be recruited for energy. Deserts are wonderful, lots of sunshine. You don't grow food there, but solar energy is wonderful. Onshore and offshore wind is quite wonderful for this, because you don't compete the same way with the biodiversity and with the food supply. When it comes to food, it is not just more food, but the way and which foods we consume. And the tremendous burden that beef puts on the planet is widely known, because we grow a tremendous amount of feed grains and clear a tremendous amount of forest for pasture lands. And the amount that you need to grow beef, as everybody knows, is 10 to 15 times more in grain and in burden on the planet than for plant-based proteins. So a shift to more plant-based proteins is a fundamental part of a solution that simultaneously allows for sustainable land use, carbon management, healthy diets, biodiversity conservation. So there are a few, I think, big constraints that need to be taken together to address this problem. And I would also suggest that the idea that we'll go partway next decade, then another part the next decade, and another part the next decade will never get us to the top of the mountain. If we want to accomplish the goals, we need already a scenario that understands where we're going for the long term. There are many falsehoods of convenience. For example, that gas is a good stepping stone to long-term sustainability because it's better than coal and therefore we'll move to gas. This is a kind of propaganda of Madison Avenue on behalf of the fossil fuel industry. If we want to get to zero by 2050, we need to drive to zero by 2050. And that means driving to wind, solar, hydro, geothermal, viable renewables, and a grid to support them, and a food supply and a diet to support that directly, because we've run out of time. There are no stepping stone moments anymore. We're just driving to the end of the story now, or exceeding all of the boundaries and losing control completely.
We have time for one question more, or we go. Please.
Thanks. This was related to what Jeffrey Sachs just said, but it was based on Professor Schellenhuber's one of your first slides was from the IPCC 1.5 report, showing the complete collapse of emissions that's going to have to happen beginning immediately or in the next couple of years if we're to reach zero by 2050. And the problem I would say is that if you look at the Keeling curve of carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere, it's continued to increase exponentially without any sign of any kink in it occurring from the beginning of the Paris Agreement, or even from some of the earlier agreements that weren't implemented, like Copenhagen and Kyoto. The world has been aware for a long time that the urgent need to reduce carbon emissions, even if it wasn't in the form of an international agreement, and yet the levels have inexorably grown without any sign of any reduction or any reduction in the rate of growth. So I wonder how you feel this immediate collapse of CO2 emissions can actually be achieved, given that so far we haven't shown any sign that we've even started.
Again, that's the theme of this entire meeting, and Jeff Sachs made a few pertinent remarks on that. I think what I've shown is that, first, you have to peak emissions somewhere in the next 2 years or so. Whether this can be achieved, I don't know. People are making promises. We don't know whether the promises will be honored. But that's the first thing. Then you have to have a steep curve downwards, as I said. It needs to be sort of exponential, bearing in mind that we need to reach 0.0 more or less around 2050. Yeah? But then there's another factor in the whole game, and that is actually referring to what Bagnato said and others said. I mean, if we do two things at the same time, we emit greenhouse gases, and we kill our best friends, that is the forest, for example, destroy the oceans and so on. That is, we are destroying the only sources we have on Earth to remove carbon from the atmosphere, through photosynthesis in particular. Then, of course, we are on the downward course, and there is no hope, actually. So we have to do both things, actually, dramatically decrease emissions, and there are roadmaps for that. And it includes, for example, stop coal power all over the planet by 2030 at the latest, and also by that time get rid of the combustion engine for mobility. Now, the solution is there. Technically, we can do it, of course. Here, Steve Chu is leading most advanced technology research on better batteries. They will deliver in the end. So we have a number of things we can do, and of course we have to reforest degraded land and so on. But if we at the same time really neglect to preserve the natural things, and I'm very worried what might happen in Brazil now with the new government, if we keep on destroying our friends, then of course we will kill ourselves.
Thank you very